Kriega Bundle. Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and welcome to the library. I'm Tennessee Fats, and we're coming to you from here today because we are shooting the final Robert E. Howard Conan specific Battle Royale for this channel. That's right. Today we are shooting Battle Royale number 25. This is a big one because this is the culmination of 4 years of work that I've done on this channel in comparing and contrasting every single comic adaptation of the 18 stories written by Robert E. Howard that are Conan stories that were published in his lifetime. Now, I showed you guys the book way back in Battle Royale number 1 that actually says this is what we're going through, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here, but I just wanted to set the stage for you guys right now. What this video is going to be is a walkthrough of every Battle Royale that we did as it relates to the 18 specific stories that I'm covering as part of this series. So at the end of this video, what you're going to have is a definitive list of this is the most accurate comic adaptation of this Robert E. Howard story, so you can go out and find it and read it yourself. Many of you are not going to want to go back and watch each Battle Royale as we go. And the reason for that's very specific. There's a lot of spoilers that we talked about in those videos. In this video, though, we won't do that. All I'm going to do is walk through high level. This is basically what happened in the Robert E. Howard story. And then I'll go back, watch the summaries for every single one of my videos, and give you a quick wrap up of why I chose which comic adaptation for each one. At the end of the video, you're going to be able to go down into the description, down there below in the YouTube bibbly-bibbly section, and you'll see the complete list. I'll put it down there in the text. But we'll also put chapters in this video. If you want to jump ahead to each story, feel free. That's what the chapters are there for. Now, without any further ado, let's not waste any time. We're running into Sumerian September full speed. Let's sit down at the desk and walk through context. What were we doing in this particular project before we start getting into each Robert E. Howard story? Let's turn the camera around and get into this. Alright, let's get into answering these somewhat rude and somewhat hard questions that you, the viewers, may be asking. And I'll give it to you. I oftentimes ask these questions as well. The first one is probably Tennessee Fats, why? Why? And why do you even exist? Okay, a valid question. Second one, what the hell were you doing here? Totally valid questions. Okay, the first one, I have no idea. I've been thinking about it for 50 years. I don't have an answer yet, but you know what? As soon as I get one, you'll be the first one to know. Second question, though, what are we doing here? Let me give you some context, okay? So bear in mind, I'm a lifelong Hyborian Age kind of guy. I've been reading Conan comics and Conan media for quite some time. And I've always enjoyed them as something that's really just an escapist sort of thing for me. I pick them up, I read them, I put them down, and then you come back to them later and you read them again. And at different points in your life, various stories speak to you in different ways. I've had some of the prose pieces speak to me that I go, oh, when I was younger, and then other times as I'm older, I'm going, oh, hey. And, you know, it's kind of an interesting thing that hits you throughout time. But early in 2021, I got my hands on this book. Now, what this book is, and I featured this in the very first Battle Royale number 1, is a collection of all the Robert E. Howard Conan stories that were written by him and published during his lifetime. Now, there are fragments of pieces as well, but they weren't published in his lifetime. This is just what was published by him during his lifetime. And it also includes the Hyborian Age essay that he used as sort of a guideline when he was setting his own stories. And I started reading through this because I was really excited about the idea of being able to read just a core piece of Robert E. Howard content that would be able to draw out the emotions that he's so good at doing in his writing. And I don't know how many of you have read a lot of his prose pieces that are Conan, Kull, Bran Macmore, or even a whole bunch of his Cthulhu stuff, or any of his other characters. He did an excellent job of creating a feel in his stories. And that feel is very, I'm going to say it's incredibly difficult for me to communicate. And that's just where I'm going to stop. It's an interesting thing because there are times where you're reading it where you will literally get goosebumps. And there are other times where you're like, oh, you got me right in the feels there, which is an incredible thing for an author that really wrote 100 years ago to be doing today. It's somewhat shocking, actually. And as I was reading through these stories and I was getting those feels, I was thinking, wait, I remember this story from some... Wait a minute. And again, I admit that I'm an old man, and my old man brain fails on multiple occasions. So as it started to happen, I was just setting those thoughts aside. I was like, this is just a me failure, move on. But when it continued to happen, I started thinking about it more, and suddenly occurred to me, wait, I did read this in a story. I read this in a comic. And I went back to the Tennessee Fats collection itself and said, what's in here? And I found a lot of these Robert E. Howard original stories that had been adapted into comic form. But beyond that, I was starting to remember comic adaptations not once, not twice, and in some cases 3 times, by different people and different companies and different times. So it really left me with a case where I was like, well, what's actually closest then? Because I started to ask the things where I'm saying, well, was that actually my old man brain failing then? Or was it actually me reading this now and just not remembering it because that comic adaptation was different? And I started to make a list. And when I sat down and made a list and I started writing it out on this wonderful piece of yellow paper, I've actually got it right over here, I said, I should probably not just do this for me. Because I can guarantee there are other people out there that are thinking about getting into Conan, that are thinking about getting into Robert E. Howard lore, who really enjoy comics, who are saying, well, how can I get that feel of Robert E. Howard, maybe without going to the prose point? Maybe I don't have access to that. Maybe I just want to say, well, what is the comic adaptation that I should read if I want to read this one story? And that's when we started the Battle Royales. Now, we have now done 24 Battle Royales. Now, 24 Battle Royales does not mean there's 24 stories. Some of these stories were so epic, it took me multiple Battle Royales to cover them. Other ones, well, I'll admit it, I may have gaffed a little bit when I was setting up the original chronology of here's when we're going to cover this when and why. The problem being, you can't get all the comics instantaneously. I am now pleased to say I have a comic adaptation of every single Robert E. Howard story done by each company. Now, I know globally, many of our viewers of this channel are going to say, wait, Tennessee Fats. Down here in Mexico, we have blankety blank, blank, blank. Or over here in Italy, we have blankety blank, blank, blank. Listen, I don't have access to those. I only have access to the mass-produced North American books, and that's what we're covering here. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do the summary video of all of those various comic adaptations. So I'm going to make life simple for you guys, and this is where I'm going to actually do the work for you. I'm going to go back to all 24 Battle Royales, and in the shooting of this video, I'm going to watch each and every summary, because I've already done all the heavy lifting. I don't need to do any more of that work. It's already there. I'm going to give you a summary of each story, which Battle Royale we covered it in, what our findings were in each Battle Royale, and who the winner was. So that's what we're doing today, and that's what this whole project has been. And I am so happy that after 4 years, we're at the end of this one, and I can finally give you guys the list that I started all the way back in early 2021. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the first of the Robert E. Howard stories, which is Gods of the North, or The Frost Giant's Daughter. All right, let's get into The Frost Giant's Daughter, otherwise known as the Gods of the North story first. And we're going to do this one first because, well, it's the first one in the actual book, and secondly, it's the first one that I actually covered as part of this series, all the way back at Battle Royale number 1. Now, what's fun about this one is it's really quick, so we'll be able to go through this fairly succinctly. Now, I'm doing this again without spoilers, but I'll just give you a high level of what happened here. Conan is part of one warring party that's basically waging war on another warring party up in the frozen north. Now, Conan is a younger Conan here. It's a very interesting early story of Conan in his adventuring days once he's ventured out of Sumeria. Within the battle, I'm not going to tell you how or tell you why, there comes a point in time where Conan essentially thunders in. He's had enough and down he goes. And when he comes to, he's faced with a situation where he's even left guessing, is this real? And you as the reader are also left guessing throughout the remainder of the story, is this real or is this a vision? And you don't know. And you will not know until you get to the end. I'm not going to spoil it for you. You're going to figure it out when you read it yourself. There are 2 different adaptations of this one that went really in very good directions. Now let's walk through each of those here. First one that we covered was in Battle Royale number 1. I already showed you the image, it looked like that. And in Battle Royale number 1, what we were doing was we were comparing the Ablaze versions from their Frost Giant's Daughters, issue number 1, 2, and 3. And we were comparing that with Conan the Barbarian, the original Marvel adaptation that we actually took from Conan number 16. Now, Conan number 16 is actually a reprint of earlier black and white versions that had already been released. But we just said, let's go with this one, and that's what we're going to take, because it's the same story. One just happens to be colorized. When we looked at those two, we found that both were actually very close to what Robert E. Howard was going for. And what Robert E. Howard was doing was writing a quick story, and Marvel did the exact same thing. Ablaze took the very same story, but added something to it. And what they added to it was a little bit of, well, let's just call it off-the-cuff addition, which really built into the story. And it built into the modern era that we're in, where really you need to add a little more pizzazz to the story for most comic readers today to really have them buy in. But it deviated a little bit from what Robert E. Howard originally intended. As we discussed, the whole point of this series is what's closer to Robert E. Howard. So the culmination of Battle Royale number 1 was that we found that the Marvel adaptation was the better of the two. We then came back to this one a couple years later, actually, in December of 2023 with Battle Royale number 17. And in that one, we took the winner of our Battle Royale number 1. And I'll show you the image of Battle Royale number 17. The thumbnail looks like that. We took that winner, which was Marvel Comics number 16, or you could have also said it was the black and white editions as well. And we compared that to Dark Horse Comics issue number 2 of Conan the Barbarian. Now, in that one, we again came back to do a pretty quick run-through, of the Marvel adaptation, because we'd already discussed it in number 1. And we said, it's fairly close and fairly succinct, and I like it because, it actually matches what Robert E. Howard was going for a fair amount. Then we did a deep dive into the Dark Horse adaptation. And in that, what we found was the Dark Horse adaptation added a little bit of a twist. And the twist that it added was that from the moment where Conan thundered in, which I already discussed with you guys here, and when he woke up, you had a very clear visual depiction of what direction this was going in. And what they did in there was they changed the tone and the theme for the remainder of that issue. And I got to tell you, that really added to the Robert E. Howard story. And in fact, it was such that I looked at it and said, actually, I think that may have been what Robert E. Howard was intending. Because when I went back and read the prose piece and actually did a deep dive into the language, the descriptive language he was using, I was like, actually, I think that is what he was going for. I think I missed that. And the Battle Royale number 17 culminated with our winner being Dark Horse Comics number 2. So, in summary, for chapter 1, if you want to read the best comic adaptation that's the closest to Robert E. Howard's original prose piece that's out there right now, you want to read Dark Horse Comics, Conan the Barbarian number 2. Alright? Next story. Okay, let's talk about Tower of the Elephant here for a second. Now, this is a really interesting short piece, and we covered this in 2 Battle Royales, and we'll talk through those in a second. Let me give you the Coles notes here of what happens in this. Again, without really real spoilers. Bottom line is, this is a story of a younger Conan again. And Conan has made his way south into the Southlands, and he's found himself into a city where, well, the only way you're really going to get by is through the thieving. Now, this is a young Conan, and he's really not all that good at the thieving. That's a problem. But after a bar fight, he finds out, oh, well, you want to go over here and you want to rob that thing. And that thing just happens to be this tower that's called the Tower of the Elephant. Everybody in town is terrified of the Tower of the Elephant, but Conan's new and he doesn't really understand why, and nor does he care. So he heads on over. Now, what they're actually terrified of isn't really the Tower of the Elephant, it's what's inside the Tower of the Elephant. When Conan gets there, he does run into another guy, and the two of them disagree that they're going to go up to the top of this tower and then climb their way on down and get all the loot and make off like bandits. Things don't always turn out as they seem. On their way down, effectively you have a very interesting, well, kind of like a dungeon crawl more than anything else as they're heading down a tower. But in here you have a key piece of personal growth for Conan. Bear in mind, you've got a younger Conan here. He still doesn't like, and in fact, even as he's an older Conan, does not like magic, does not like extra-dimensional things, does not like monsters. These are all bad things. He has no problem fighting them, but he doesn't like them. And in this, he's forced to actually emotionally relate to a magical being. Now, I'm not going to spoil what happens here. This is probably one of the more beautiful things where you actually see character growth in Conan, and you really do want to enjoy this one. Now, we've covered this, as I mentioned, in 2 different Battle Royales. The first one was Battle Royale number 3. The thumbnail looks like this. And we put that out in July of 2021? Yeah, somewhere around there. And in that, what I was doing was actually comparing 2 different Marvel adaptations of this one. Yeah, Marvel actually adapted this thing twice. Once in the comics, and once in the Savage Sword. Now, what's interesting about this was, they weren't just a reprint. They were totally different stories. First one was in Conan the Barbarian number 4. Cover looks like this. And the next one was in Savage Sword of Conan number 24. Yeah, looks like this. At least that's how we compared them. I'm not saying that's their release dates. done by two powerhouses in the arts field. And then, quite frankly put, I was pretty happy with both the art and movies. And I don't want to go too far down the road on that one. But the bottom line is here, when we sat down and we said, well, which one's closer? It really came down to an issue of page count. And it also came down to an issue of really what could you put in a color comic. I still suspected that comic adaptation, which was Conan the Barbarian #4, was probably held back a little bit by the Comics Code Authority. I think if given the chance, Barry Windsor Smith and Roy Thomas would have gone a little further into that one, but I don't think they had the chance. They also had a page count issue. Savage Sword of Conan has a lot more pages, and it has a lot more, well, we'll just call it paper real estate that you can cover this story in, and they did a phenomenally good job. Strictly due to the page count constrictions, and because of what was being done, the Savage Sword of Conan one really won that hands down. They were both very close, but the comic adaptation just had to abridge it too much. And we were saying, well, what's closer? Well, the one that actually gives you the whole story is closer. The next time we came back to this one was in Battle Royale #5. And the thumbnail looks like this. And what we did in that one was we compared the magazine adaptation, which was Savage Sword #24, which was our winner from #3. And we compared that to Dark Horse's Conan the Barbarian #20, 21, and 22. Now those issues look like this. Now in that, we did take the time and pick up issue number 19. And it took us some time to actually get this story. This is why we only came back to it in October of the following year. And we really wanted to make sure we had the prequel issue. And we did read the prequel issue, because I always wondered, well, what was he doing in this city? And the prequel issue actually set that up perfectly. Now, when we looked at these two, again, I've already discussed the magazine one, and I said, yes, it was very close. And I said page count was really why it won. But it still abridged a little, because this was a very detailed story that Robert E. Howard wrote. Short, but very detailed. The Dark Horse adaptation did a wonderful job of dragging it out. But what the Dark Horse adaptation did was it actually added a little bit more. Now, I'm not going to tell you where they added more, but there was one particular aspect where clearly Dark Horse was paying attention to what Robert E. Howard wrote. And I'm also not going to spoil that. If you really want to know, go back and watch Battle Royale #5. But although Dark Horse did deviate a little from what Robert E. Howard had written, what they added and what they included that the magazine did not, in my mind, gave them the win. So surprisingly enough, although I do normally prefer magazine adaptations, which are bigger print and generally they're the grittier version, the Dark Horse adaptation, which was done in issue number 20, 21, and 22, was actually the winner of the overall Battle Royales #3 and 5, where we covered Tower of the Elephant. If you want to see what those images look like again, I'll put them up over here. Well, there you go. That's that one. Let's move on to the next story. All right, let's talk about Rogues in the House. Now, this, I think, is actually the most appropriately named Robert E. Howard Conan story, because it's about a bunch of rogues in a house. I know, it just fits, right? And there's a lot of pieces in this that I can give you, but if I do, I might give away too much of the story. Okay, I'm going to give you how it starts, and I'm going to give you the overarch. Let's go with that. The story starts with Conan basically in prison, and he's there because he murdered a priest, because that priest was responsible for hanging a Gunderman friend of his. And, you know, you probably don't want to hang too many of Conan's friends. That's probably a bad idea. Yeah. Anyways, while he's there, a noble person comes to him, not saying who, not saying where, not saying why, and says, hey, listen, here's the deal. I need you to go murder that priest over there, because if you don't, tomorrow, he's going to murder me. So Conan's like, well, if it's going to get me out of prison, I'm entirely cool with that. Bippity boppity boop, what happens is a whole bunch of different rogues end up in that priest's house. And by a whole bunch, I mean, well, a couple. And they're all there to murder said priest. The bottom line is, though, that it's not going to go all that well. Because the big baddie in this story is actually a Thak. Now, Thak is possibly the coolest Conan baddie ever. Phenomenally interesting character. And again, I say character because you could say, well, hold on, Tennessee Fats. I know Thak, and that's not really a character. Ooh, bear in mind. Let's just take some time there and step back to some Tarzan mythos, shall we? Au contraire, mon frère. Now, it may work. Listen, that's just my opinion. Enough of my opinion. Let's get into the Battle Royale content. We actually covered this in only one Battle Royale, and that was Battle Royale, gotta say it correctly, number 2. Which we put it in July of 2021. This was an early one for us. And in there, we did a comparison of 2 different adaptations. The first one was Conan the Barbarian number 11, the Marvel adaptation, which was only 1 issue. And then we compared that to the Dark Horse adaptations, which was issues number 41 and 44 of the Conan series, which look like this. Now, Dark Horse had a lot more page count that they could work with on this one. And Conan the Barbarian didn't really have that much page count. The Conan Marvel adaptation was actually too succinct. What it did was it cut too much out. Nabonius wasn't dove into enough. They spent more time worrying about Jenna, which isn't part of the Robert E. Howard story. So that one was pretty easy to step back and say, well, that's missing a lot. The Dark Horse adaptation added some. Now, this is the thing. This is where a common theme that we're going to see with the Dark Horse stories. They're very appropriate and stick to the Robert E. Howard content, but they add more as they go. Now, in this particular instance, though, it wasn't enough to kill it. I'll tell you honestly, if you want the best Robert E. Howard adaptation that's in comics, what you want to read is the Dark Horse adaptation, because that was the winner. That was in issues number 41, 42, 43, and 44 of their Conan series, and they look like this. All right, without any further ado, let's head into the next story. All right, let's talk about this weird and wonderful and wacky story that is Black Colossus. Now, bear in mind the title Black Colossus, dressed all in black. We're going to come back to that later because I have questions. This is a weird one because it's almost a story of two stories. And I say that not in a negative way. It's actually a wonderful building way. You have a typical sword and sorcery trope story where princess needs help, finds hero, solves problem. Works every time. But in the middle of this one, Howard decided to take some time and he wrote in an Iliad-level epic battle. Now that Iliad-level epic battle is a weird one because if you read it completely separate from the overall narrative, it almost tells a totally different story. It's like the characters were added in here for something else. And when Howard couldn't use it, he put it in here. This is a weird one. And again, that's just me wearing my conspiracy theory cap, but it's still a good story and it stands really well. A little bit more. And I would have considered this a Howard epic, but I'm going to withhold on that one for now. So let's talk about the story itself. Again, high level so we avoid the spoilers. Effectively what happens is Princess is having a bad day. And I don't mean that in a derisatory way. I don't mean she stubbed her toe. I mean she's having a really bad day. Her kingdom is entirely besieged by every nation around it. So she's had to hire a mercenary army to protect herself. Okay, makes sense. You've got the gold, you've got the money. Let's buy the troops. That's going okay. But now there's a new twist. Unfortunately, the princess finds herself now being haunted nightly by this demon. And I don't mean demon as in devil horns and cloven hooves. I mean demon as in really, really bad dude. Losing her poop, she runs out into the night and goes to the temple of Mitra. Probably a good place to go to get advice. And this is one of the few times where in Conan, Robert E. Howard has written in a god talking to a human. I think it's the only time, actually. Where Mitra says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get out of this temple. Head on down the street. The first human being you run into, you give your kingdom to him. Now, that is horrible advice. And that's horrible advice 99.9% of the time. Now, you could ask the question here, Tennessee Fats, was that actually Mitra talking? Or was this one of the priests maybe on the payroll just doing a little bit of a, whoa, take off the conspiracy cap, stick with the story, okay? She wanders out and finds this mercenary. Guess what? Mercenary army in town. It's the first person you ever enter. It's the middle of the night. Mercenary. Big dude. Just happens to be named Conan. Promptly gives him the entire kingdom. Now, again, rather odd. But the story then involves Conan going through the very epic battle that I mentioned here earlier, and then going through a couple additional actions near the end to wrap the whole thing up. It's really quite an epic story, but just missing the piece of extra layer that would be in the overarching theme to really say this is an epic. Quite a fun one. Okay, how did we discuss this one? We discussed this one in 2 Battle Royales. The first Battle Royale we covered this one was in January of 2023, and that was Battle Royale number 9, and it looks like this. Now, I did that one somewhat tongue-in-cheek because really it wasn't a battle. It was more of an incumbent, but I decided to give it a Battle Royale to showcase 2 different presentations of the same story. This was originally done by Marvel in Savage Sword of Conan number 2, and the image of that, if you want to know, looks like this. Then they turned around and did something different. Many of us know about the Marvel Treasury Editions. They're giant things, and they print things in color on them. So they redid this one in Marvel Treasury Edition number 15. It looks like that. When I was looking at these two and reading them side by side, I couldn't leave it alone. I had to say, just because of the presentation in larger format and in color, Treasury Edition number 15 just presents totally different. It is a completely different presentation. Now, I didn't go through the two stories side by side because they're the same story. But I did in that one just give it to Marvel Treasure Edition number 12. Because if you're going to read it, you might as well read it in giant format and in color. It was just beautiful. It was just wow. Yeah. We'll stop there. I came back to this one in March of the same year, 2023. And we did Battle Royale number 11. Thumbnail looks like that. And in that one, what I did was I took that Marvel Treasure Edition. I've already showed you what the image of that looks like. And I compared it to Conan the Cimmerian, number 8 through 13. Now, this is where we were actually able to do a typical Battle Royale and compare page by page in the story to what Robert E. Howard wrote. Now, I couldn't get my hands on the actual comics, so I went out and got the actual hardcover edition of that, which was the Black Colossus Dark Horse Collection. Looks like this. And we went through those. Now, what did we find in that? Well, the Marvel Treasury Edition was a very good retelling. The Marvel adaptation that was in Savage Sword 2, which was the same one, same thing, but it was too brief on that epic battle. Marvel had a page count issue, and that epic battle was pretty big. So they brought it on down, diminished the role of the battle, and then added more to the actual sword and sorcery tropes that were at the end of the tale. I'll give you that. Okay, you've got a real estate issue. Granted. What did Dark Horse do? Well, Dark Horse had a real estate issue as well. But the reason why Dark Horse had a real estate issue was because they just kept adding stuff. Now, Dark Horse does a fantastic job on these things, and the reason why they do is because they're constantly adding in extra character growth when they're writing the stories in their comic adaptations. The reason why they do that is because they're writing an overall Conan arc. They're telling the story of his life, and they're showing the character growing along the way. That doesn't always fit into Robert E. Howard and what he wrote in his stories, so they add pieces. So 2 issues of the overall story they wrote was just leading up to how Conan ended up in that city, wandering down that street when he met that queen. Great, but set it aside. What about that battle? Did they do a good job of the battle? Yes, they did. Unlike Marvel, they were full tilt on the battle. They did an excellent job on that. But they kept downplaying other aspects and ad-libbing other things. Well, the point of these battle royales is to say which one's closer to the Robert E. Howard edition. Although I really loved the Dark Horse edition, it wasn't a Robert E. Howard true story. Now, I'll tell you what it did do, though. Remember I mentioned Black Colossus, the title of the story. The Dark Horse adaptation did a much better job of explaining in their interpretation what the Black Colossus was. When I read this and I read through all the comic adaptations, I kept saying, well, you could allude to the Black Colossus being, or it could be. Dark Horse really spelled it out, but that wasn't enough. So if you're looking for a true Robert E. Howard adaptation of Black Colossus, you want to pick up Marvel Treasury Edition number 15. It looks like this. Now, without any further ado, let's move on to the next story. Alright, let's talk about this Iron Shadows in the Moon thing, which you're also going to find published under the title of Shadows in the Moonlight. You'll see it in both. It's the same story. The title only depends on, well, who published it, when, and where. Yeah, I think that's how we're going to end that one. I'm going to go really high level on this one because this is an incredibly good story, and I don't want to spoil any of it for those of you who haven't read it. The overarching theme in this is that the tension is created by the very question of, well, 1, what is civilization? But 2, what's left unsaid? There are a lot of things in here that Howard left unwritten. It's alluded to, but not spoken to. And because of that, it's left to your mind to fill in that gap. And that creates a tension that's palpable throughout the whole story. It's really well done. Okay, so high level. Conan and a young lady agree to work together because horrible things have happened to both of them prior to this story even beginning. They are left as refugees and row out into the Sea of Vayet, where they end up on an island. And the island, well, it's a heavily forested island, and Conan is out there buckling and swashing and buckling, doing all the swashbuckling things that a sea-bound Conan would do. When suddenly it occurs to him, wait a minute, there's something in this forest. And what makes matters even worse is, I know what that is. And then it's a, holy crap, I'm terrified, let's get out of here. And they head tearing back down to their boat to find that they're trapped. Now that's the beginning of where the horror starts. This thing then goes on to throwing pirates in the mix. You've got all sorts of Eldritch level, Cthulhu level, demigod type curses. And on top of that, you still have the thing in the forest. The setup is phenomenal. But it's what's left unsaid throughout it that really leaves you as the reader enjoying filling in the gaps. I think that's good enough. We're going to stop there on the actual description. Go read it. You will thank me for it. I guarantee it. Here's how we cover this one. There are 3 comic adaptations of this that are handled in different ways. The first one we did was in Battle Royale number 6. The thumbnail looks like this. And in that, what we did was we compared Savage Sword of Conan number 4, which also looks like this, to the Ablaze 3-issue miniseries, which was Conan, Cimmerian. It was titled under, I believe it was Iron Shadows and the Moon was the adaptation they chose to go with. And those look like this. And what we did was we compared and contrasted those. Now, you had 3 pages of a modern comic versus 1 Marvel magazine. Now, we have found that real estate in these Robert E. Howard stories is typically the challenge that publishers deal with because there's only so many pages in a book. Marvel's solution to this was they said, well, let's cut back on some of the things that were left unsaid. And remember how I said earlier that the majority of the stress and the tension in the story comes from those things that are left unsaid? That really leaves a palpable gap in the story. The majority of the mechanics within the Marvel adaptation that was in Savage Sword of 4 was very formulaic and follows all the way through. But because of the gaps that are left, you actually have a gaffe at the very beginning of the story. And that gaffe is enough that it leaves you stepping back with just there's a hair on my tongue, Jerry, and you put it there. It's one of these things where you just step back and no, it just doesn't sit right. Mechanically, the rest of the story flows, but that part falls short. Now, you would say, okay, Tennessee Fats. The rest of the story follows, though. Ablaze must have really gaffed this if they lost it. No. Ablaze brought their A game to this one. And I gotta say, Ablaze just knocked this out of the park. Because what Ablaze did was they recognized the fact that the majority of this story is what's left unsaid. And they spent the time to fill in not only a little bit of the unsaid, but explain a big piece that deals with the very demigod Eldritch level horror and why that exists in the first place. Mechanically, the story follows all the way through, but they've added this little piece. Now, you could say Tennessee Fats, that's an addition. It's outside of what Robert E. Howard wrote, but it's not really. What it is greater detail into the very vision that Conan has that explains that, so that you as the reader who have read the Robert E. Howard edition can go, that's a really interesting take on what Conan saw. It's not wrong. It's there. So at the end of Battle Royale number 6, I gave it to Ablaze. Ablaze won out on that one, and that one kind of surprised me, not going to lie. So we went on and we then came back to this in February of 2023, and we did Battle Royale number 10. Thumbnail looks like this. And we pulled out those Ablaze books. And we said, okay, Ablaze books, this is you. We're going to team you up here, and you're going to fight off against the Dark Horse adaptation, which came from Conan the Cimmerian, number 22 through 25. And those look like this. Now, Dark Horse did something interesting here. Now, we have talked about Dark Horse a lot on this channel. We've said what a really good job they do of adding in additional character here and character development for Conan because they're throwing these into an overall arc of what they're telling in the life of Conan. This one, they went a little weird. They told this story from the point of view of female character that's in the whole story with Conan. It's not written from Conan's point of view at all. It's not the narrator of the Robert E. Howard story at all, the nameless narrator. It's literally this young lady. Now that really adds a twist. In addition to that, they added in a prologue at the beginning of this one. The prologue actually does a little bit to add into the very horror that was unspoken at the beginning of the Robert E. Howard story. Now you'd say, well, Tennessee Fats, hold on. Bear in mind, what's closer to Robert E. Howard? That stuff's off base, right? It's no longer Robert E. Howard. Well, you're right. It is. And normally I would say, I still say it adds a little something. Not a lot, but something. Because if you actually drill down to just the Robert E. Howard component, it's not bad. But they gaffed it. And they gaffed it in the story of what happens on the island. And I don't want to spoil this, but I will tell you this. The chronology is all wrong. And that's where they went off on it. And that's chronology is a technicality, but it really is a difference to the Robert E. Howard piece. And that's why, even at the end of the second Battle Royale, we gave this to Ablaze. So, if you were to say, Tennessee Fats, what is the best comic adaptation of Iron Shadows and the Moon? I would tell you to go out and get the Ablaze miniseries, the 3-part series that looks like this. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the next story. All right, let's talk about Slithering Shadow. Now, this one is weird. And I made this comment repeatedly when we went through this original Battle Royale. This story was one of those more odd ones. I think that's the best way I can actually say this, because this is one that Robert E. Howard wrote, and I believe Robert E. Howard wrote this being fully aware of what he was doing. If you ever read the Dark Horse comics that are in the back in the letters section where they talk about the adventures of Two Gun Bob, I read one ages ago that was based on a letter that I believe Robert E. Howard had written to... It wasn't Lovecraft. Who was it? I can't remember now. Anyways, within it, what he was saying was he was commenting on the fact that he could make kink and he could make things that were just outside of the realm of norm a lot easier than, well, most other people could. And he could totally write that if he wanted to, but he chooses not to. But again, even going all the way back to the 30s, sex sells. And this is an interesting one because I believe Slithering Shadows was his attempt to really draw in more of a kink factor than what he would normally ever do. And I say that because of the content of the story. And when I actually shot this original Battle Royale, I commented repeatedly, it's like, be aware of this. If you got young kids, be aware that this word kink is going to come up a lot. So the story is one where Conan effectively wanders out of a desert, finds his way into a city, gets into a battle with a bunch of guys, gets into a battle with a monster, and then leaves. That's effectively it. Now, I haven't spoiled anything because really what the story is all the noise and the backstory that goes around that. I won't tell you who the monster is, I won't tell you what the battle is, but I will tell you this much, that this city is an interesting one because it's an interesting mix of both science fiction and Cthulhu-level horror. And it comes down to conversations between Natala, who is with Conan, and Thalos, an individual that he runs into within the city. There's betrayals along the way, there's interesting conversations, but there's also this real level of depravity that even Conan references as damned degenerates when he goes through the story himself, which is kind of harsh coming from Conan. Anyways, we covered this one in Battle Royale number 15, and it looks like this. Now that one came out in October of 2023, I think, and in that what we were comparing was Savage Sword number 20, which was reprinted in Conan Saga number 16, which is actually the one we used. And we compared that to Conan the Avenger, which is a Dark Horse series, numbers, I think it's 13 through 15. Now, we had a trade paperback, and that's how we get through the Dark Horse versions of this one. And I'll tell you, that actually plays into the conclusion that we came up with on this one. When I went back and I reviewed the video on this one, I was not really surprised because of what came out of the last one, where I was looking at the Marvel magazine version. One of the comments I made was, this seems to be suffering from over-editing. And I mean that in that it seems that the Marvel team decided to write out a variety of the topics and the things that Thalos was talking about in the story from what they were willing to produce. And it's almost to the point where they said, well, you know what, let's take out these things that we would refer to as, degenerate or what have you within the Robert E. Howard version, because that's the term that Conan used, and just really tone that down. And what it did when they did that was they really changed the tone of the story a lot, and they changed a lot of the rationale coming through it, because it made you then question, well, what is Thalos doing here? And why is Thalos doing what she's doing here? It seemed rather strange. Same thing with the actual characters that are involved in it. It's like, well, hold on. Why are they saying that? That seems strange to me. Then we compare that to the Dark Horse version. Now, the Dark Horse version, I tell you, Dark Horse really leaned into this. And I mean, leaned into it full kilter. Now, what they did here was they added, first of all, a story behind this to explain why Conan was in that desert with Natala. And I thought that was actually a nice piece. But again, we're going to set that aside because we're saying, well, what's actually closer to Robert E. Howard here? But then in the actual story, they really leaned into the very items that Marvel seemed to have edited out when they put out their adaptation in the magazine. Kind of an interesting piece. But I'll tell you this much. They totally won. And the reason why they totally won was because they continued to keep in what Robert E. Howard intended. Leaning into it a little bit, that was more of an interpretation thing, but when you're actually looking at saying, well, what's just not included versus what's included, Dark Horse definitely had more in there. So when we're looking at Battle Royale number 15, this one over here, and you're saying, well, Tennessee Fats, what's the closer story to Robert E. Howard? The winner clearly comes into Conan the Avenger, number 13 through 15. Without any further ado, let's get into the next story. All right, let's walk through this fantastic story of A Witch Shall Be Born. Now, I have to say A for a very good reason, because there is only one witch in this story. This is a weird one. And I gotta tell you, it's an odd one because it's a Conan story that doesn't have Conan. I'm being somewhat glib about that. It does have Conan, but Conan in this story is very much a secondary character. The majority of this story is actually written about a queen, the queen's sister, and this guy named Valerius, who seems to be the dude that just gets everything done. And it's an interesting thing because Conan kind of runs parallel to the overall story, doing his own thing, and he does come wrapping back around near the end of this story. But he's not pivotal to the points of action that actually occur to bring you to the conclusion of this story. The story starts off with the queen of this particular kingdom waking up and finding her twin sister there, who she didn't even know she had, has returned from her exile, and she's a witch and she's taking over and she's going to wreak all manner of hell in this city. And by the way, twin sister, you're going to the dungeon where you're going to have terrible, terrible things happen to you. It's really brutal. Along the way, this doesn't go well for Conan, though, because he's the captain of the Queen's Guard, and when he discovers what's going on, he's taken out to the desert and crucified. That's not good. And then his adventures occur outside of that. It's this guy Valerius, who actually is the major character in this one, and the major action maker in this one, because he's the one that's actually solving all the problems inside the royal palace to deal with the witch and with the queen. It's really an odd twist, because it's almost like you could take the Conan character, take the name Conan out, stick another dude in, and that story would still flow just as well. It's a weird one. Anyways, we covered this one all the way back in Battle Royale number 16. Looks like this. That was in November of 2023. And in that, we compared Savage Sword of Conan number 5, which looks like that, with Conan the Avenger number, is it 20 through 25? I believe it's 20 through 25. The problem is I don't have the comics. I read this from the hardbound edition of the Dark Horse books that I managed to get my hands on so that I could actually finish this Battle Royale. I saw some really weird things in this. And I'll tell you, it's interesting looking back on this and remembering, oh yeah, I remember that. It's funny because the Marvel adaptation really tried to fight this. It's like they were fighting the story itself when they were producing the comic. Because you got to bear in mind, you're fighting a story that you're basing your comic on that's fighting to keep Conan out of it. The Robert E. Howard piece has Conan removed from the action. But when you pick up Savage Sword of Conan, you're going to read a Conan, a Cull, maybe a Red Sonja, Solomon Kane story. You're going to read a flagship Robert E. Howard piece of IP. You're not going to be reading a Valerius story. Marvel had to twist this a fair amount and twist the narrative to make this fit. And when they did that, they had to change what Conan was doing, running parallel to the actions inside, to make it match and make it come back. And literally just to get Conan more and more on that page when you're going through the story. Dark Horse, when they did this one, didn't do that. Dark Horse left this. And they left this to run as a major story with these other characters, with Conan running around on the outside. But what Dark Horse did was to make more Conan page count. They didn't take any of this stuff away that wasn't Conan. They left it front and center. They just added more Conan backstory over here. So you want to know why Conan has 3,000 soldiers? Oh, well, here's the backstory behind it. You want to know why Conan did this? Well, here's the backstory behind that. They did all of that to add on top of the Robert E. Howard story. It was an interesting take on this one, and honestly, a different one that I wouldn't have seen coming if I was an editor trying to put this together. And I'm glad I don't work in comics as an editor, because I obviously would be terrible, because this was really well done. So the Dark Horse version on this one, just because it didn't edit and didn't change the story, was the winner. So if you're out there and you're looking for the best comic adaptation of A Witch Shall Be Born, and you only want one, you want to pick up Conan the Avenger, number 20 through 25 by Dark Horse Comics. They look like this. At least that's what the hardcover book looks like that I read. Anyways, without any further ado, let's get into the next story. Okay, let's talk about this Devil and Iron thing. Now, hold on. I don't think that's up high enough. Okay, that's up high enough now. Yeah. This is an odd one, and I don't mean odd as in it's a Conan story that doesn't have Conan, like the last one. He was there just a little bit. What I mean is it's odd as it's like Robert E. Howard doing okay, everybody, take 2. Let's see if we can do that better. And I mean that because, well, the themes in here are very similar to Iron Shadows and the Moon. The story, again, spoiler-free as much as I can, involves Conan and a female character on an island in the Sea of Vayet, where Conan is trying to rescue this female character who's been captured by an ancestral deity demigod type character called Khosrow Khel, who has brought an entire set of ruins back to being brand new after thousands of years of it being, well, rubble and dust. In addition to that, he brought all the inhabitants back to life after thousands of years of being dust. And that's not just the people. That includes the monsters in there, too. Really, it's a fun story. It has a lot of really cool parts to it, and honestly, you could read Iron Shadows in the Moon and this one, The Devil in Iron, back to back, and I don't think you'll really be disappointed with either. They're both very good stories. But the themes in this and the keys that are in this are so close to what was in the original one, it leaves you going, why? Now, I don't understand the why. I'm not going to bother trying to understand it. I wasn't alive at the time. I didn't know Robert E. Howard. Who knows? He did it for a reason. We're here to talk about the comic adaptations. We covered this year, in June of this year, 2025, with Battle Royale number 23, and it looked like that. And in that, we compared Conan the Slayer number 8 through 11, I think. Well, I read them in a Marvel Epic edition. And we compared that to Savage Sword of Conan number 5, which looked like this. Now, these were very close. And there are very small pieces where you note the difference in here. Marvel, and I've mentioned this many, many times, Roy Thomas really knows Robert E. Howard and Conan the Barbarian quite well. And when he made the Savage Sword of Conan adaptation of this story, he did a great job. He was bang on staying the course the whole way through. But there's one weird part in this where Marvel sort of went, we're just going to go off kilter a little. There's a weird twist of fate in this story where the female character ends up on the island that Conan is meant to end up on. And she ends up there through escaping from a lord and then swimming across a lake. And all sorts of things happen. But she ends up getting there. And it's one of those weird twist of fate things. And that's how Robert E. Howard wrote it in. Roy Thomas, on the other hand, said, no, I'm going to make it so that was a plant. She was meant to escape from that. And she was meant to find this horse. And it was meant to get her here because we were chasing her here. She's meant to go there. Because I guess that's one of those things where Roy Thomas, when he was reading Robert E. Howard's work, went, really? She just magically ended up on the same island? Yeah, I think that's what happened there. But other than that, it was very, very close. Now, Dark Horse, when they touched on this one, what they did was they added story in front, and they added story at the end. And in fact, the story that comes after the Robert E. Howard story truncates is actually a really fun one. I would encourage you to go get those comic adaptations and read that, just for the comic story itself. It's actually quite good. The story in front of it is also quite good. But the actual piece where they focused in on, which was issues number 8 through 11, they really stayed the course of what Robert E. Howard meant to do. But what they did was something different. They added in something that was only alluded to in Robert E. Howard's story, which was a parlay point where Conan, being a chieftain of a group of soldiers, was parlaying and trading prisoners with this particular kingdom. And they threw in the fact that this female character added a little bit of extra dubiousness to her character and added a little bit more cunning to develop the character some more. And it was interesting because that was built in to sort of strengthen the character going forward. And it might also have been done to distance this story from the Iron Shadows in the Moon that was also done. It's an interesting one, and they did make that choice consciously. Why? I don't know. It does add to the story. It actually adds a lot to the story. It makes it much more entertaining when you're reading through it. And it builds into the story that comes after this. So that's kind of cool. But again, the whole point of these videos is which one's closer to Robert E. Howard's version. And honestly, at the end of that one, I said that Savage Sword of Conan, the original Roy Thomas version, even though it deviated a little with that whole thing of, no, we let her get there, I still said that's the winner, and it looks like this. So if you're out there and you're saying, I want to get my Conan on, and I want to be able to read one comic adaptation of The Devil in Iron, you want to read Savage Sword of Conan number 5. Without any further ado, let's get into the next story. Alright, let's talk about this black circle thing. Actually, I shouldn't call it a black circle thing. It's called The People of the Black Circle. It's a phenomenally complex Robert E. Howard piece. And I mean that. Like, this is a long one. And we're going to go through this in a very abridged version when we're talking through this one. Because again, I'm going spoiler free in this summary video. But we've covered this one in 2 Robert E. Howard Battle Royales. And I'll be honest with you guys, I miffed it. And I mean I miffed it. Seriously, I did. I thought I was only going to cover this in 1, and I completely missed the comic adaptation when I was sitting down to map out all of the videos that I was going to make. And I only came back to it in 2025. So we're going to talk through 2 Battle Royales when we walk through this story. So, People of the Black Circle. Very, very high level. very, very complex. When I sat down to write my notes on this story in recording Battle Royale number 8, which looks like this, I wrote out 10 different subplots that I was tracking through the story. 10 different subplots in the story. That's a lot. And the other interesting aspect of this is, I think this was Robert E. Howard's attempt to make a strong female lead character that would equal or rival Conan in his Conan stories. And you got to read the story to really see this. And you actually, you don't really need to read the story, because I'll tell you, if you read the winner of the Battle Royale, you'll see it in there too. This female lead character, you'll see their actions throughout the story, and you'll see what they do, and you'll see how they handle themselves, particularly when you get near the end of the story, where you go, ooh, look at you go. Yeah, it's really something, and I gotta tell you, I was impressed. It's a really good story. I would encourage you to read it. Very, very high level, though. What happens in this story? Well, there's a princess, and the princess, ends up being kidnapped by Conan for a variety of reasons. And Conan is then going through a wild goose chase through the mountains where a variety of people are chasing them. I'm not going to say who, but there are a lot of different moving parts, all with their own individual motives for wanting Conan and the princess. At the end of the day, the really big baddie, the largest elemental thing that needs to be fought here, are the people of the Black Circle. A group of sorcerers that live in a castle that everybody kind of respects, but also is kind of terrified of. And Conan does need to face that sort of debacle to solve the whole problem. I won't tell you how it gets solved. It's actually a pretty interesting one. And as I say, twists, turns, lots of layers. 10 different subplots. This is a deep one. Okay, now let's walk through the Robert E. Howard Battle Royales. Well, as I showed you guys earlier, we covered this first in Battle Royale number 8. All right, and then we turned around and came back to it in Battle Royale number 8B. It's actually called Part 2 when I went through my little description there, but we're going to refer to these as 8 and 8B. Now, 8 was originally done in December of 2022, and in that one we compared Savage Sword of Conan, numbers 16, 17, 18, and 19. That's right, 4 issues of the magazine, with the Ablaze version of their 3-issue series of The People of the Black Circle. Now, when you read through these, and if you really do want to read both versions, I'll warn you this, they're really close. They're actually really, really close. But at the end of the day, and this was a pretty quick synopsis for me when I went through these, it went straight to Marvel. Now you're going to know why with the fact that, well, I already said it. They gave this 4 books of real estate. Literally, this thing got 4 issues of Savage Sword to cover the story. When I say it was a complex story with 10 subplots, you need that much space. Ablaze did their darndest. They really went at this and tried everything they could, but there are so many moving parts, you can't fit that in 3 books that are of that limited page count, especially when you're doing all the fantastic art that Ablaze throws in their stuff. So, not really slagging Ablaze. Ablaze did their best, but Marvel brought their A game. 4 issues of Savage Sword, and that's how we finished Battle Royale number 8. Then we realized we goofed, and we came back for 8B, and that was done in June of this year, 2025. And in that one, we were able to get the last couple issues of the Dark Horse version of People of Black Circle, which is a 4-part series, and compared that to the 4 issues of Savage Sword that was the winner of Battle Royale 8. So when we looked at those two, there are some really interesting twists. I would have expected Dark Horse to have stuck a little more to the Robert E. Howard story, because we have noticed they've done a really good job historically of doing that. But they went off on some deep ends on this one. I think the largest piece of detraction for me for the Dark Horse version that made them fall to the wayside, and I'm kind of letting you guys know now which one the winner is, was the fact that they changed the very source of the magic, of the ensorcelment. That was the whole point of the big baddie in the story. It changed from this one thing, which was what Robert E. Howard clearly wrote into his dialogue, and that Marvel respected and used very well in their story. And they changed it to something else over here. Now, I'm not going to say it made for lesser of a story. It was actually a pretty good story. But when you change that, that's pretty material. The other aspects that they did was they shifted around chapters in the story. So things that happened after in the Robert E. Howard story were suddenly before, and things that happened before were suddenly later, and you were back and forth, and it was a really complex thing to read when you're trying to compare it to a Robert E. Howard version that you know in your head, and you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't happen yet. But then you go, wait a minute, that doesn't even happen until later. And wait, that already happened. Again, it was their editorial choice to build it that way. It made for a great read, but the point of these videos is which one's closer. So interestingly enough, Savage Sword of Conan, with their 4-part powerhouse that they brought through to this one, won not only Battle Royale 8, but Battle Royale 8B. Took on both new contenders and just smacked them to the curb. So, if you're looking for one version, one comic adaptation of Robert A. Howard's People of the Black Circle, you want to pick up Savage Sword of Conan, numbers 16, 17, 18, and 19. I don't actually have all 4 of them, but if you pick up this trade paperback, they're all in there, and that makes for a good read. All right, without any more further ado, let's get on to the next story. All right, let's talk about this Shadows in Zamboula story, which was later, interestingly, published under the title Man-Eaters of Zamboula. And it's funny because the second title really gives you more taste for what you're going to get into this story. You see what I did there? Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay, we covered this one a long while back, and we covered it in Battle Royale number 7. The thumbnail looks like that. And I'll tell you, a couple things coming out of reviewing this particular Battle Royale when I'm going back in time. A, I'm glad I'm no longer recording in the dungeon. No. I'm glad we're out of there. The office is a much better place to be doing these things. B, this is a really weird, twisted story, and I'm actually surprised by the findings that we had all the way back then. Okay, let's get into the actual story itself. Shadows in Zamboula, or Man-Eaters of Zamboula. Key difference there. So, this is a story that Robert E. Howard made, which really seems like 2 different tales mashed together. One is the story of Conan dealing with, well, a group of, cannibalistic tribes people that kill people and sacrifice them and then eat them, and their particular arrangement with an innkeeper in a city. And the second part of the story is Conan's dealing with a royal concubine who seems to have a fair number of machinations, political machinations of her own, and plans for the future that's trying to utilize everybody around her. Now, Conan really runs through this story very much being the mid-career bonky Conan that runs around and just bashes things. He's obviously incredibly intelligent. He's survived at this point in time in his career. He's no longer the young pup that he was. But at the same time, he's also not an old, grizzled, full-blown beast mode. He still finds things to be a challenge physically. He still does things regularly that you sort of go, could you have done that differently? But he does make his way through this one, and he does it rather well. When you read the story and you read the Robert E. Howard piece, if you're an avid Conan reader, it's going to be somewhat painful. I'll tell you that part right now. And it's painful intentionally. There's a twist to this story. When you're reading this, you're very much going to get a sense that Conan is being led along, just following instructions. Until you get to a certain point in the story when you suddenly realize that's actually not what's happening here. Conan is very much aware of what's going on, and he's not a buffoon. He's got his own plans in this thing, and you'll see how they all come about as you get past that point. I'm going to stop that story right there. I don't want to give you any more because I'll just give it away. And that's the spoilers we're not doing here. Now, we covered this all the way back, as I mentioned, Battle Royale number 7. Looks like that. November 2022 is when we covered this. And I got to tell you, we compared this one to 2 what I thought were going to be strong additions. And it's interesting seeing the conclusion we came to. We compared Savage Sword of Conan number 14, which was reprinted in Conan Saga number 17. And that's the one we actually flipped through. And we compared that to the Ablaze version of Shadows in Zamboula. Now, I'll tell you, typically we always find, or I've noticed we find, with the Marvel adaptations, when they're involved. The Marvel adaptations are very strong presentations of Robert E. Howard material. Unfortunately, in this case, it seems like Marvel made some editorial decisions, and those editorial decisions effectively diminished or wiped out one of the 2 main components of this story. I won't say wiped out completely. I think that's a bit of a misnomer. It clearly downplayed it to the point where the first big thing wasn't really a big thing. It was actually a small thing. And it really didn't give you the sense of the overarching theme or terror that was within Robert E. Howard's story. This was very much a story of theme and wandering around in the shadows in Zamboula, which were horrifying because you're wandering around in a deserted city in the dark at all times because the inhabitants know there are lurkers in the dark that take people and kill them and eat them. So that's kind of downplayed a lot in the Marvel adaptation. They do a great job of the second part of the story, which was the political machinations in the temple and all that sort of stuff. But again, that first piece, down we go. The Ablaze edition did not do that. The Ablaze edition really stayed true to the Robert E. Howard work. And it's interesting that the Ablaze edition didn't do the little twists and turns that we typically see with Ablaze. And I'm not saying that Ablaze does wrong. What Ablaze does is they add where they think it's necessary to help enhance the story. They didn't do that here. They left this very much as Robert E. Howard intended. The art is interesting, and I will tell you this much. The art in the Ablaze version is somewhat risque. So if you're sitting there and you have young viewers around and young readers, no, okay? But it is actually the most accurate version based on Robert E. Howard's original story. So I was surprised to find in my review of Battle Royale number 7 that if you're looking for one comic adaptation that is the most appropriate and the most true to Robert E. Howard's original work for the Shadows in Zamboula, you want to read Ablaze's Conan, Shadows in Zamboula, parts 1, 2, and 3. Now, without any further ado, let's get on to the next story. Okay, let's talk about this Pool of the Black One thing. Now, it's funny because I always look at this thing and I think it should be called the Pool of the Black Ones, as in multiple. But for some reason, it's only black one. Kind of does make you wonder when you're reading the story. Anyways, this was the only Battle Royale that we covered in the series that was given to an incumbent. I can only find one comic adaptation of this one, which was really surprising. Because everything else you have multiple ones, but for this one, only one. Huh, odd. Anyways, we cover this one in Battle Royale number 24. The thumbnail looks like this, and I saved it to last because it was just an incumbent. We did that in June of 2025, just this year. And in that, we walk through the whole story. Now, I'm not doing the whole story here. Again, if you want to see that, click on the links down below. High level for those of you who want a summary, though, without an actual spoiler. Effectively, a ship called the Wastrel that's way out to sea ends up picking up a passenger. And that passenger happens to be Conan. Conan ends up joining the crew and ingratiating himself to them. But the captain, Zapparavo, seems to have his own evil plan. And I wouldn't say evil per se, but I think we all know it is. He's found out about an island that predates the Hyborian Age. In fact, there's actually a hint in the Robert E. Howard piece that it could be Thurian. And within that, he's heard there's loot. He wants to loot. Let me tell you something. There's a lot of things on an island. It ain't loot. None of them are loot. In fact, it leads to nothing but bad things. Done. End of summary. You want to check it out? It's a pretty good story. Go check it out yourself. Now, let's talk about the comic adaptation of this one. At least, I don't need to really in detail because I'm just going to tell you what it was in. And that's in Savage Sword of Conan number 22 and 23. Those are the only issues that are out there that cover the Pool of the Black One. And it's a Savage Sword story. And Savage Sword stories, as we know, are typically very good. We've covered a lot of them on this channel. They're very pure adaptations of the Robert E. Howard piece. Now, I don't need to go into too much detail to say, well, you know, it was close in here and it was far here. And it was... Doesn't matter. It's the only one, so de facto, it's the incumbent. So if you're looking for one comic adaptation, because there only is one, of The Pool of the Black One by Robert E. Howard, you want to pick up Savage Sword of Conan number 22 and 23. And if you want to pick them up in a trade paperback, this one's got them both in it. Just saying. Anyways, without any further ado, let's get into the next story. Alright, it's time to talk about this Beyond the Black River thing, and I gotta tell you, I'm a little excited about this. I'm excited about it because Beyond the Black River ranks amongst one of my top Conan Robert E. Howard stories. This is a really well-written story, and there's a lot of fun within it. And I mean fun for you as the reader, not fun for the characters by any means. This is, yeah, it's a long slog, and we'll get to that in a minute. But it does rank amongst the tops for me. And we covered this year in March of 2025 with Battle Royale number 22. It looks like this. And in that Battle Royale, what we were doing was we were comparing Savage Sword of Conan number 26 and 27 with the Ablaze miniseries of Beyond the Black River. Now, Beyond the Black River is an interesting one. It's an older Conan. He's no longer the young pup. He's no longer at the middle of his career. This is one of his last adventures written by Robert E. Howard prior to him being clawed back into Aquilonia and the events that lead to him becoming King Conan. And oftentimes when you're reading commentary online, ticket, go ahead and check it yourself, you'll see this one as almost referred to as Beast Mode Conan. And there's a reason for that. He literally is Beast Mode Conan in this book. And it's a phenomenal thing. It's got some Eldritch level horror to it. Not really horror, but at least some mysticism to it. It's got Conan using that and then dealing with the ramifications of his actions in using that, which is a phenomenal thing. You've gone from, I hate sorcery and magic and it terrifies me, but I'll kill the heck out of it, to, nah, I saw a guy draw this once and I'm pretty sure I know how this works. Let's just in the ground here and let's just stand back and I'm pretty sure it's going to save the day. And lo and behold, it did. Now, there was a hell of a lot of ramifications of that, but it happened. Effectively, Conan in this one is a mercenary, and he's at the border of Aquilonian territory, and he's helping defend a fort, but he knows this is not so good. It's not a good situation. He knows this is not a tenable situation either. The interesting aspect of this is, throughout the story, there's Conan and there's one other character, and the dichotomy here is pretty clear. Conan is representative of a barbarian that's acting civilized, whereas the other character is a dichotomy of a civilized individual that's acting like a barbarian. The two of them team up and work together, and at the end of this, it's interesting how you see how the one wins out over the other. And you do have the closing statement in here where it does talk to barbarism being the natural state of man, which is a very editorial statement by Robert E. Howard. I'm not going to ruin it for you. What I will tell you is there's a lot of action in here. There's a lot of running through the jungle in this. Is it really a jungle or a forest? It doesn't matter. You get the phrase I'm going for here. And at the end of the day, it really is one where it's an epic level battle and it's just drawn out. It's almost like a war of attrition, the way this whole thing plays out. But there's this level of mysticism on top of that. And it's interesting how that mysticism resolves itself, and Conan isn't even there when it happens. It's kind of a funny thing. Anyways, let's talk through what we observed in the actual adaptations. Well, The Savage Sword of Conan, again, this is a Marvel magazine. These are pretty darn good. Issues number 26 and 27, written by Roy Thomas for his adaptation. And when we went through this, we found that their adaptation was very true to what Robert E. Howard wrote. The only issue that I had with it was it downplayed the level of two particular monsters that were brought in early in the story. And I don't mean downplayed them as in they weren't that important. Downplayed them as in it diminished their physical size. And in doing that, you sort of diminish the level of threat. And I can tell you, when I read the Robert E. Howard piece and I read his description of one of these particular things, I thought, okay, that's it. That's the big bad guy right there. That's it. But when that then went out of the story and left, and I was like, that wasn't the big bad guy? And then you start to realize, oh, there's something even bigger here. You get a real sense of scope. When Marvel downplayed that, and this was I don't know if this was an editorial decision. This could have just been an artistic decision. It really did hurt the story. And that was my one criticism of the Marvel adaptation. The Ablaze version, and again, it always comes down to page count. There were so many moving parts in this story, and I keep using the phrase moving parts because Robert E. Howard is really good at creating a lot of levels of moving parts, and that's what really makes a good story. But there's a lot of moving things in this story that are happening concurrently, and Ablaze has to simplify this. Ablaze also has to simplify the back and forth that happens in the action in the jungle/forest, the area that's beyond the Black River, when Conan and his confidant are there. And unfortunately, things are happening. And Ablaze had to downplay that, strictly due to real estate. I mean, page count. That's what it really came down to. And because of that, although Ablaze did a really good adaptation, and I will give Ablaze actual bonus points in this, Ablaze's depiction of the demon in this story was phenomenal. And it was really, really well done. And it was one where it's like, oh. So when I was reading this, I was so close to giving it to Ablaze just because of that. But that's not the point of these. That made for a really cool story. It made for a really cool read. And I'll give Ablaze a lot of cred for this. But again, which one's close to the Robert E. Howard edition? So in this one, we have to wrap it up and say that if you're looking for one comic adaptation of Beyond the Black River, you want to get the Conan that's included in Savage Sword of Conan, number 26 and number 27. All right, without any further ado, let's get into the next story. All right, time to go through the first of the Robert E. Howard Conan epics for this particular summary video, and that's Red Nails. Now, Red Nails is one we covered all the way back in Battle Royale number 4. The thumbnail looks like this. And in that, we compared Savage Tales, number 2. Savage Tales, not Savage Sword, Savage Tales, all the way back there, to the Ablaze Red Nails 3-part series. So we were comparing a black and white magazine to a 3-part modern comic. Now, let's talk about the story, because this is an important one. People either really like Red Nails or they really don't like Red Nails. I actually find myself over here. I really like Red Nails. This thing covered a lot of ground, and I think it did a really good job. And I also think this was another attempt by Robert E. Howard to take a strong female character and push it up in front of Conan and have that character run parallel to Conan as an equal throughout the story. I think he did a better job in the other story we already covered in this video, but Valeria was a strong character. Now what happens in the story? Well, Conan and Valeria are matched up early in the tale. And they have to face off against a dinosaur, they have to face off against a desert, they have to face off against a giant walled city within the desert, and when they get there and they think it's deserted, they then find out, oh my god, there's 2 different tribes in here that have devolved to really bad, and they've been warring for centuries. It's not a good situation. Within that walled city, you have royal intrigue, you have slaves, you have whipping, you have monsters, you have a demon living in the basement, you have lightning bolts that can be shot off of a stick. There are things in there that just make you go. And really, it's a world that Conan and Valeria are not used to. Effectively, Conan and Valeria have to navigate their way through that mess to just try to get out at the end of the day. It's a really cool story. I don't want to give you too much away because I would encourage you to read this one on your own. But the point of this video is, what's the best comic adaptation? Well, let's get back to the actual comic adaptation and compare and contrast here. We've talked about Marvel magazines repeatedly in this very summary video, and we keep seeing how Roy Thomas is very, very close and stays close to the Robert E. Howard material. In this one, he did it again. You see him again following along and following the theme. Let's talk about Ablaze for a second. Ablaze did the same thing. Very close all the way through, except for one change. Now, I will give Ablaze a bunch of bonus points because Ablaze did a modern retelling of this. And I don't mean modern as in they made it modern day. They basically came back to it with a different set of eyes. And they said, well, how can we really change the theme inside that village, or sorry, that walled city, to make it look more like it's a different world, to really show the difference between Valeria and Conan and these people that they're dealing with. And they came up with an artistic theme that matched these people inside the walled city that totally made them different. That was an artistic choice. It was pretty cool. And I gotta tell you, that does boost it a little bit. They also did a really good job drawing a dinosaur. And that was pretty darned awesome. That again brings it up. But the art isn't the actual story. Ablaze skipped a piece. This story involves something we already talked about in this video, which is a weird piece of 1930s kink. Don't ask me why it's in there. It's there. It's in the Robert E. Howard edition, and Marvel, when they were making their edition, stayed true to that and kept it in there, which is strange because we've seen other videos where they've drawn it back out. Ablaze was the one in the modern adaptation that took that out. Now, did it add anything to the story? Did it take anything away from the story? Not really. Not really at all. When you read that Ablaze version, it's very good. It's actually a very good retelling of Red Nails. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is which one's closer to Robert E. Howard. And I can conclude now. If you want to read one comic adaptation of Red Nails, you want to pick up either Savage Tales #2 or get one of the colorized reprints. I would strongly encourage a Treasury size edition one. Those are big and they're really fun to read. All right, without any further ado, let's get on to the next story. Okay, let's talk about this Jewels of Gwahlur thing. Now, I had to put in the extra H on this one because the names in this story are really hard for me to pronounce. So I had to make sure I took the time to get it right. Now, we covered this story all the way back in Battle Royale number 14. And it looks like this. And we did that in August of 2023. And in that, we were comparing the 3-part Dark Horse miniseries called Conan and the Jewels of Gwahlur. It's appropriately named, with Savage Sword of Conan number 25. So you're taking a Marvel adaptation and comparing it to a Dark Horse adaptation. Now, these are 2 companies that do really, really good adaptations. So you knew this one's going to be a close one. So here's the deal with the Jewels of Gwahlur. This is effectively a dungeon crawl. It's effectively Conan wants some loot. He's got to get it through a little bit of trickery. There are 2 other parties involved that either just want to keep the loot where it is or they want to steal the loot for themselves. And Conan is competing with both of these interests to try to get it. The problem is, it's in an area where, well, there's some things. So you start off with a temple. The temple then turns into some underground caves. Those underground caves lead to some other underground caves. And there's some rivers, there's some magic. It's a bunch of things. But it's effectively a dungeon crawl to get some loot. It's a fun story. I don't really see a lot of personal growth for Conan in this one. I do see Conan sort of handling this whole thing in a somewhat blasé manner as he's going through, because he's just like, well, we're just going to do X, Y, and Z, and that's going to lead to this. And you're like, okay, I get it. But that's effectively the story. So now let's talk about these adaptations, shall we? Now, we know Marvel adaptations are really good. They really, really are. And that's just something we're going to set to the side and just know we're coming to that. Dark Horse adaptations are also really good, though. So here's what happens in the Dark Horse adaptation. They don't surprise us by doing a terrible job. They do a really, really good job. But they do something slightly different. They took a different take with Conan's approach to the scenario. And it's very subtle, and it's hidden in the language. The actions, bing, bang, bong, all follow what Robert E. Howard wrote. The same thing with Marvel. Bing, bang, bong, follow what Robert E. Howard wrote. But Dark Horse decides to make Conan a little more glib, a little more roguish. It's almost like he's joking and having fun while he's doing this adventure, which is kind of interesting. And I got to tell you, for me as a reader, I thought that was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. I was like, this is a phenomenal adaptation of this story. I love what we're doing here. Yes, flippant, glib, and somewhat contrite Conan, especially given the situations that he's put in this particular story. I can see just sitting there going, are you kidding me? Are you seriously kidding me? Now, he doesn't say that verbatim, but you can clearly get that tone through the comic. That did a really good job. The depictions that Dark Horse did as well, they were subtle, but they were subtly different. They sort of downplayed a little bit of what I'm going to call the cave system. And you'll see it if you actually read the two and go, oh, that's what they did there. That's what Tennessee Fats was talking about. Marvel didn't. Now, when you look at these, though, and this is one of those hard ones where you got to say, well, hold on, what's the point of the series here? It's which one's closer to the Robert E. Howard series. I would love to be able to say, I enjoyed this more, so ergo, this is the one I'm going to go with. But I can't do that. The point of these is which one's closer to Robert E. Howard. Marvel, and I haven't talked a lot about it because there's really not a lot to talk about. They nailed this page by page by page. The language was the same, the action was the same, the depiction was the same, everything was the same. It's almost like they just took Robert E. Howard's story, said, this is the comic script, go. And they did a fantastic job with it. Dark Horse, I really like what you did there, guys. Don't get me wrong. And of the two, I personally would choose to pick up the Dark Horse version to read. But if you're asking me which one's closer to Robert E. Howard, and if you're out there looking for one comic adaptation of the Jewels of Gwahlur to figure out which one you're going to read, you want to get Savage Sword of Conan number 25. Now, without any further ado, let's get on to the next book. All right, let's talk about the Phoenix on the Sword. Now, I got to tell you, I'm a little excited to talk about this one for a couple reasons. And I'm going to say that's mainly two reasons. First of all, this is actually the first published Conan story Robert E. Howard wrote. Now that's saying something. Second reason, though, is that this isn't a Conan story. This is actually a King Kull story. The Phoenix on the Sword is a retelling of a King Kull story that was not selling. That's called By This Axe I Rule. Now, if you're a King Kull fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know what happened with this story. You know that it was subsequently published. You know that it was turned into comics. You know all of these things. But this story is that. It's kind of strange, because when you look at the two of them, yeah, if you read them both, you're going to sort of wonder. That's all I'm going to say about that. All right, we're going to leave that alone right now, because we're going to circle back on that in a bit. Now, we covered this in Battle Royale number 18, and the thumbnail for that looks like this. And we did that back in December of 2023. And in that, what we were comparing was the original Marvel Conan the Barbarian comic, the color comic, annual number 2. And we were comparing that to the Dark Horse King Conan, the Phoenix on the Sword, 4-issue miniseries. Now, we could talk through these in a variety of ways. First, let's go through, well, what is the story all about? Okay, really high level without any spoilers. An assassination attempt is made on King Conan. That's right. The King Conan, as in he is now king, and he is a disgruntled king, and he's not a happy king. He's a very, what would I say, melancholic king? Oh yeah, melancholy, I think is the word that goes there. Anyways, there's an attempt made upon his life by 4 individuals. 4 of them. And with those 4 individuals, we have the key character popping up, which is Thoth Amon. Now, Thoth Amon brings in a bit of an Eldritch, sort of outer planar sort of thing that can either show up as a flying gorilla or a teleporting baboon. Depends on which way you look at it. We'll get to that point a little bit later. I'm not giving you any more notes than that. That's it, okay? You know the players that are involved. You know there's something simian involved here, and you know there's an attempt on Conan's life. Done. I would strongly encourage you to read this story, though. This is really a powerful Conan piece. It's an even more powerful Cull piece, but never mind that now. Set that aside. Okay, let's talk through the comic adaptations now. Okay, so I'm going to go with the Dark Horse discussion first. Dark Horse does a very good job of interpreting Robert E. Howard. We've mentioned this enough times. I don't need to actually say it again. The funny part about this, though, is they do add in little deviations, and typically those deviations are added in when they're building on their own story continuity or arc, or where they've decided, we need to add something here to clarify this to the reader. Now, in this case, they do two things. One was an artistic choice when they came to the actual presentation of the dream sequence. There's a dream sequence in here where Conan is talking to somebody, an individual that's now long gone. Now, are they dead? We don't know. Are they actually an individual? We don't know. But the interaction is a big one in the story, and the Dark Horse adaptation in the color layout with the art that goes with it is mind-blowingly beautiful. It's one of these things that's just, ooh, it leaves you stepping back going, that's really, really good. Another thing that Dark Horse did in here that was a nice step was, I think they did more work in the character of Thoth Amon. And what I mean is, their Thoth Amon looks a lot more Thoth Amon-y to me than Marvel's Thoth Amon. I think that's, I've said Thoth Amon enough in that sentence, but the bottom line is, the character just appears to be better. It just seems to be a better character and a better representation of the character we know as Thoth Amon, both in his actions and in his appearance. Because they have added a little bit of a twist here with a sacrifice that doesn't happen in the Robert E. Howard story. It's a little deviation, a little dalliance. And I'm going to let that one go. It's still off. Granted, it's stepping away from the Robert E. Howard course, which we're going to talk about. But it's there. Still makes for a good read. The other thing that Dark Horse did here, though, is they took the flying ape extraplanar creature, which is pretty horrifying, and they made it something even more horrifying. They made it a teleporting baboon. Now, I can tell you this much. When I look at a winged ape creature, I'm pretty darn scared. Now, if you suddenly say, okay, change that to a teleporting baboon, I was not having it. This was a lot of words I could use here. I'm just going to say this. It was terrifying. And as a reader, I was like, whoa, you guys just stepped that way up. Goosebumps. It was good. It was a really nice change. Definitely stepped up the game and definitely made it more of something that would horrify a modern reader, not a reader from 100 years ago. Now, that's the Dark Horse adaptation. What happened in the Marvel one? Marvel had a bit of an issue here, and Marvel's issue came in really their own making, because Marvel was also making King Kull comics, and King Kull, as we already discussed, was by this axe I rule. Well, you now have the same continuity, two characters going through the exact same thing, and Marvel had to write to this and try to fix it. So when they tried to fix it, what they did was they, in one scene, had an image of Kull appear as a ghost or a specter behind Conan, who was in the exact same situation. The other thing that they did was they spent a little bit of time at the end and in the language explaining that this is history repeating itself. Now, that's a Marvel issue. That's not a Robert E. Howard issue, and that is a split in the story. The other thing they did here, which is really taking away from the sense of stress in the story, was when the attackers came to go at Conan, he recognized them all and he named them all as they were coming in the room. Conan should not have known these individuals. The stress within the story is that Conan is expecting a poniard to come out of nowhere or poison in his goblet at all times. He doesn't know who could be killing him at any point in time, which is why he can never relax. This is why he's so angry as a king, or at least one aspect of why he's so angry as a king. So when Conan suddenly goes, hey, it's you, when you do that, it takes that stress away. So it's interesting. I know the first one literally is an editorial issue, and that's something you can say, okay, I understand why you did it, but you still really deviated there. And when you take the second one, though, you really take away the stress. The changes Dark Horse did actually added to, if not improved upon, what Robert E. Howard had written originally. So the winner of that one was Dark Horse. So to quick answer your question, if you were to say, Tennessee Fats, I want one comic adaptation of The Phoenix on the Sword by Robert E. Howard, I would tell you to pick up King Conan, The Phoenix on the Sword by Dark Horse Comics, issues number 1 through 4. 4 is that number. Without any further ado, let's get into the next story. Let's talk about the Scarlet Citadel, shall we? Yeah, I think we shall. This is a really cool dungeon crawl story. And there's a lot of things I can say about this, but I don't want to go into too much details because I could potentially spoil it for you. What I will tell you is this. If you're looking for a pure Conan dungeon crawl story that has all sorts of Eldritch level horror, and all the typical Robert E. Howard sword and sorcery monsters you could possibly imagine, all wrapped up into one thing that involves epic level battles and wizards and intrigue, this story is pretty much going to give it to you. Now, we covered this all the way back in Battle Royale number 13. The thumbnail for that looks like this. And we did that in June of 2023. And when we did that, what we were comparing was Savage Sword of Conan number 30 with Dark Horse's King Conan, the Scarlet Citadel miniseries, which is issues 1 through 4. Both of these had their merit. Both of these went a little off the rail, but let's save that till later. Let's talk through the story really briefly here. Effectively, as I mentioned earlier, it's a dungeon crawl. The story opens after an epic battle where, unfortunately, Conan's army has lost. Now, that's a bit of a surprise to most people. It's like, wait, whoa, King Conan's army lost? Yeah. They lost. They didn't just lose a little, they lost a lot. And why'd they lose? Because the whole thing was a trap. Basically, the whole thing is a setup by a bunch of people who are conspiring to take over a couple kingdoms. With them is a wizard, and within this whole machination, they've decided to take Conan alive, and they stick him in a dungeon. Now, in that dungeon, Conan runs into some stuff. And I mean stuff. And this is the stuff where really you are going to enjoy this story. I'm not going to tell you what happens thereafter. I can tell you this. The level of intensity continues to rise as the story goes on. And I will be honest with you about this one thing. One of my favorite pieces of Robert Howard writing ever is actually in the middle of this story. It's not my favorite story by any means, but my favorite individual piece is sitting right smack dab in the middle of this one. And it's one where hairs up and full body shudder. It's like, ooh, you got me on that one, buddy. All right, let's talk about the comic adaptations here. Now, Savage Sword of Conan number 30, not bad. A couple derivations along the way. Small ones, slight ones. Dark Horse, though, not bad, but also a couple derivations along the way. Now, what both of these did, and I made a point of this in the video where I covered this in Battle Royale 13, where I said both of these guys have kind of said, hey, you know what? Let's remove this potentially politically unpopular idea of Conan the Barbarian having a harem as a king and just take it completely out of the story. Both of them did that. It was gone. Now, I will say this. One of the two actually made a reference to his women, but nobody ever discussed or used the word harem. That was gone. And that was a particularly important piece of subtext. And it was important because it really set the level for one character to let you know exactly how evil that person was. So choosing to take that out does detract a little. Not a lot, a little. The Dark Horse adaptation and the Marvel comic adaptation of their adventure in the dungeon is actually fairly similar. But there was a stylistic difference between these two. What Dark Horse decided to do was they decided to give Conan a torch. They decided to let Conan see what was down there. Robert E. Howard's story in the Marvel version followed the old school theme of he couldn't see jack, and I mean nothing, which is why he was going through a lot of this with no idea what he was looking at. There was a torch at certain points in time, but when you were not supposed to see what was going on, Conan could not see what was going on. And Marvel stuck with that. Dark Horse decided to give you that. They decided to give you, no, this is what he's seeing. This is how it looks. And I got to tell you, that's pretty damn horrifying what they actually included in there. And so I'm going to leave that one at that. Now, I can accept both of those stylistic differences. Obviously, Dark Horse is a little more off because they've actually changed something a little bit. And Marvel is pretty close. But the key in here, and this is the kicker, when you're having the conclusion of a story, you actually want it to happen in the city where Robert E. Howard had it happen. Dark Horse decided to change that a little. So the big conclusion, the big battle, didn't happen where it was supposed to. It happened elsewhere. Now, I know why they did it. I'm not going to spoil it for you. There's a reason why they did it, and it actually plays into the character development of certain people within the story. But it's still a walk away from the Robert E. Howard piece. And that's why when we did Battle Royale number 13, we found that the best version of Scarlet Citadel was in fact in Savage Sword of Conan number 30. So, if you want to get one version of this comic and you only want to read one that's accurate, get the Savage Sword of Conan number 30. You'll thank me for it later. Without any further ado, let's get into the next story. Alright, it's time to get into the final two stories. These are the ones that horrified me the most when I was doing this project for a couple reasons. In this case, it's specifically because of scope. Hour of the Dragon is the single longest Robert E. Howard piece he wrote about Conan. It's a massive epic. And I'm going to be struggling here to actually keep this one down to what it's got to be. All right, so here's the deal, guys. Very high level without spoilers. Hour of the Dragon is essentially a story wherein Conan is usurped. He has lost his throne, and he needs to earn it back. It has been taken from him by, well, 4 individuals that have worked together to bring back a 5th guy from the dead. And then on top of all that, you throw in this wonderful adventure and add onto that a 10,000-year-old vampire. And you go, ooh. Yeah, it really builds into the Hyborian Age lore and goes back into Robert E. Howard's Hyborian Age essay. And it helps you understand what came before. It's a really interesting world-building piece. And also a tour de force for the character of Conan, because it forces you as the reader to see each aspect of his adventures that led up to him becoming a king. And then you really understand, that's why he's King Conan. It's a pretty cool tale. All right, now we covered this one in 2 separate battle royales. And the first one was bad enough that we had to do it in 3 separate parts. Yeah, that was a lot. Now we covered this in Battle Royale number 12 first. And we covered that through April and May of 2023. And the thumbnails will look like these, and I'll keep these going over here. Now, I say April and May and thumbnails because we had to do this in several parts. The first part was where I went through the entire Here's What Happened in Hour of the Dragon. That took just an hour just to do that. Then I went through the Marvel adaptation. And the reason why that took its own part is because the Marvel adaptation is massive. It's giant-sized Conan, numbers 1 through 4. Add on to that a vignette that's in Savage Sword of Conan number 8, and then a full-size story in Savage Sword of Conan number 10, and you have a 6-part story. Now granted, this one's a little shorter, but that's a lot of real estate, and that's a lot of story. Now why did Marvel give it that much time? Marvel had to give it that much time. Marvel does a phenomenal job of staying really close to the Robert E. Howard. We've noticed it time and time again in these summaries. But how do you summarize and stay true to the course when it's a story that's this big? Well, you do it with real estate. That's how you do it. Page by page by page by page. Now, Marvel had a bit of a challenge, though, because there are certain aspects of the Robert E. Howard story which don't always involve action. They involve thinking. They involve plot. They involve a lot of other aspects. Well, when you're doing individual comics in the mighty Marvel manner, guess what you need? Action. So they threw in a couple trials by combat in there, and the other thing that Marvel did was they squiffed the end a little. I'm not going to spoil it for you as to how they squiffed the end, but they really did change and tone down the level of threat when the whole thing came to a fruition at the end. And you're like, Now, let's compare that to Ablaze. Well, Ablaze had 4 issues. And this is modern-sized comics. This is not a lot of real estate. So Ablaze had a real challenge here. So how do I take this giant epic and bring it into this without losing the story? Unfortunately, you can't. And that's what we found when we read the Ablaze version. Now, Ablaze did a really cool thing. What Ablaze did was they really leaned into the idea of this being a coming-of-age story. And when they leaned into it, what they leaned into was the coming-of-age of King Conan. Now, a lot of aspects and a lot of moving parts in this do come of age, but that's what they lent into. The other thing they did was they changed that 10,000-year-old vampire's modus operandi just a little, but that just a little is enough for you to step back and go, So at the end of Battle Royale number 12, I concluded, well, it's the Marvel one. Marvel one wins this one because they've got the real estate, they've got the page count, and they nailed it. Whereas Ablaze was challenged in page count because it's such a huge story. And then on top of that, they did a couple small changes. We then came back to this in December of 2024 with Battle Royale number 19. It looks like this. Now in that one, we took the entire Marvel giant monstrosity of issue count that we already talked about, and we compared that to 12 issues that Dark Horse gave this. That's right, 12. And they spread it over 2 miniseries. Now, that was a really smart choice. So you had King Conan, Hour of the Dragon, issues 1 through 6, and King Conan the Conqueror, issues 1 through 6. So now you've got kind of an even playing field in page count for both of these adaptations. So which one's better? Well, I already talked about the foibles that were in the Marvel one, right? Marvel had 2 trials by combat and the end a little bit. So, okay, but it was still good enough to beat Ablaze. Okay, all right. What did Dark Horse do? Dark Horse did a phenomenal job. And I mean that. And I cannot speak highly enough of what they did here. They took Robert E. Howard's giant tale and brought it into comic format and consistently put it out in 12 issues as a retrospective look back by an even older King Conan. Now, the fact that it's an older King Conan looking back kind of spoils the ending for you because, obviously King Conan survives this thing. But he's done it in a variety of different ways when he's looking back. And the other thing is the focus, the very heart of his kingdom, materially changes in the Dark Horse adaptation. And Dark Horse leaned into the idea of the coming of the age wasn't so much Conan. It was actually somebody else. They really leaned into the idea that, in fact, the heart of his kingdom wasn't Conan at all. And it was really well done. Now, that wasn't in the Robert E. Howard story. It wasn't explicitly stated this is what happens. And the other thing that they did is they moved around a couple of the characters in the story. So this person happens to be here now, and this person happens to be here. Those are minor, but it helped them build into their idea of what the heart of King Conan's kingdom was. But what they did do is they didn't the end. That's right. They stuck with the end. The ending keeps that ramped up level of, oh my God, this is a big problem. And that really was the thing that sets these two apart. Page count wise, very similar. Trial by combat. Dark Horse actually threw it in as well, so I'm not going to slag him on that. Marvel did it twice. Dark Horse did it once. But it was keeping the ending accurate and actually drawing into that level of horror that Conan was actually facing. It's not something you just bonk with a sword. This is a problem, and it needs magic. That was well done. So if you're looking for the best adaptation of Hour of the Dragon, you're saying to yourself, which one do I go and get? I want to get the best Robert E. Howard appropriate level of adaptation. You want to read Dark Horse Comics, King Conan, Hour of the Dragon, number 1 through 6, and King Conan the Conqueror, number 1 through 6. Without any further ado, let's get into the last story. Alright, let's get into the final Robert E. Howard Conan Battle Royale we're doing on this channel. And just saying that really adds a level of finality to this project. 4 years in the making. Alright, we'll talk about more of that in the wrap-up. Okay, Queen of the Black Coast is my favorite Robert E. Howard story. About Conan, that is. It's not my favorite Robert E. Howard story overall, but it is everything that I picture when I try to picture a Conan story in my head that makes a perfect story. And that's why I was so terrified of covering this, because it's one of those things where you really never want to meet your heroes. You don't want to do a deep dive into something that you really love and have to read it numerous times because you're worried that it's like, ooh, is my memory of this story actually that good? It is that good. Oh yeah, this is a good one. All right, very high level here, and I'm going to warn you, there are spoilers in this particular one because there's no way I can high level this without giving the spoilers. Conan ends up joining a pirate crew and falling in love with a pirate queen named Bayleet. And I did pronounce Bayleet for a reason. Check out Battle Royale number 20 if you really want to know why. They have some good times together. Together. Not generally good times, because a lot of people are dying around them, but good times together. Then they go up a river, and horrible things happen. Absolutely horrible. Everybody dies. This is a horribly heartbreaking story for Conan as a character, and you see the most character growth in any single Robert E. Howard story for Conan here. It's a phenomenal piece. The mechanics of that, I'm not spoiling that for you. It's a really good read. I strongly encourage you to pick this up and read it. But the point of this is, well, what's the better comic adaptation? If I just want to read that, well, let's answer your question, shall we? Okay, Battle Royale number 20 was the first one I did to cover this, and the thumbnail looks like this. I did that in March of 2025. In that, I was comparing the Marvel adaptation with the Ablaze adaptation. Now, Ablaze had a miniseries just called Queen of the Black Coast, which was issues 1 and 2. That was it. Lots of variant covers. Some of them were really stunning, but 1 and 2. Marvel did this in issue number 59 and then issue number 100. Now, there were a lot of issues in between that had Bayleet and Conan in it, but I didn't include those because those weren't part of the original Robert E. Howard story. Now, I also included a little bit of commentary about 57 and 59 because there was a little bit of lead up and a little bit of trail off that went around 58. I didn't include it in the actual subjective conclusion at the end of it where I said which one's closer to Robert E. Howard, but I gave it to you as a reader and as a viewer just so you know, hey, this is what happened. In that, we said what happened with the Marvel and what happened with the Ablaze. Marvel was very good. 2 comic issues, not a magazine, not a black and white, still subject to the Comics Code Authority. And there was a skiwiff in there because of the Comics Code Authority. Not saying what it is. Go back and watch issue number 20 if you really want to see that. But the funny part about this was they were bang on. The only thing they did a little bit off was they included, once again, Marvel's trope of trial by combat. For some reason, they have to throw it out in there. And we've seen this time and time again in these summaries, where he said, what did Marvel do that was different? There it is again. Issue number 58. Why is it in there? I don't know. Did it add anything to the story? No, it actually detracted from the story. And that's unfortunate. But still a very true telling. Even the hyenas. Got to enjoy some hyenas. That makes for a good story. The Ablaze version. That thing was all over the map. Mechanics-wise, it was everywhere. It gave you prequel information within the 2 issues. It drew everything entirely different. There were things that were completely missing. No hyenas. Snake thing, I don't even know where that came from. The actual battle at the end, totally different. None of it made sense. It followed the overarching trope of Conan falls in love with pirate, goes upriver, everybody dies. Okay, how we got there? Very different. Now, it was a pretty cool story. I will say this. If you were to read that with no knowledge of the Queen of the Black Coast, and you said, I just want to read a pirate story with Conan and everybody dies. Yeah, it ticks all those boxes. But the point is, what's closer to Robert E. Howard? Giving it to Marvel. That one was actually a pretty easy one to go with. Then we came back and we looked at Battle Royale number 21. Looks like that. Also in March of this year, 2025. We took those Marvel issues and we compared it with the Dark Horse adaptation. Now, Dark Horse did something similar to Marvel. They spent a fair amount of time building up the relationship of Conan and Bayleet. The other thing that Dark Horse did was they had spent a fair amount of time at that point in time building up a sense of self-reflection and self-doubt in Conan. So they spread this over a bunch of issues. So for our purposes in Battle Royale 21, we looked at Dark Horse's Conan the Barbarian number 1, 2, and 3. And then we added on to that 22, 23, 24, and 25. So 7 issues. So 7 issues of Dark Horse versus 2 issues of Marvel. And again, Dark Horse, as I said, was adding to it. They were adding more along the way. And they did a really good job with that. If you were to say, well, what's the psychological impact on Conan? What's the overall story here? How is that relationship working? How do they talk to one another? Like, build on that, because it was so brief in Robert E. Howard's work. They did an excellent job. Where they went awry, so many mechanical pieces. So many mechanical pieces. This blood necklace that was cursed, clearly cursed. You clearly get a sense this thing is cursed. And after reading the story again and again and again, let me tell you, it's cursed. The fact that Bayleet is, that blood necklace, not there. It was rope. Like, no, where's the hyenas? I love my hyenas. Where are the hyenas? They're just not there. Again, same overarching trope. Takes you from beginning, middle to end. But all along the way, you're going, snake creature, demon thing, winged ape, all of these things slightly off in the mechanics. A really, really good story though. And it's one of these ones where if I was to say, listen, what's banging out there as one of the best comic adaptations that really adds to, this one would rank high up on that list. I really enjoyed what Dark Horse did there. But again, we come back to the point of this very series. Which one's closer to Robert E. Howard's original prose piece? And the interesting part is after both of those Battle Royales, it falls right back to Marvel, and issue number 58 and 100 take it. So if you were to say, Tennessee Fats, what's the single best comic adaptation of Robert E. Howard's Queen of the Black Coast that I should pick up? Go buy yourself Marvel Comics, Conan the Barbarian, number 58 and number 100. Yeah, woo, that's it. Let's get into the wrap-up. Oh God, it's over. Okay. All right. Let's talk about this. Let's wrap this bad. Hold on. I got to put my coffee down. I got to tell you, I needed that coffee because actually recording this summer video has been over a 3-day period. Going back and reviewing all of my videos and checking all of my notes, and I've got pages of notes on this stuff. To be able to record this has taken so much time, but I am incredibly happy to have this done for you all. I set out initially to say, in that book, the giant book of the 18 stories that are written by Robert E. Howard about Conan that were published in his lifetime, what's the best comic adaptation of each? We've now done that. We did it over 24 Battle Royales. And those Battle Royales took 4 years. The first Battle Royale I recorded, which going back and watching it now is really painful to watch, was recorded and released back on June 28th, 2021. Battle Royale number 24, coincidentally, was recorded and released on June the 28th, 2025. Exactly 4 years to the day. And if you added up the time in all of those videos, and you wanted to watch all of them beginning to end, 22 hours and 53 minutes. That is a lot of me going blah, 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 and probably the most painful thing you could ever torture somebody with. So I'm happy to have this summary video being a lot quicker, and you'll be able to jump through the chapters and pick which ones you want to look at any given point in time. In the description down below, I will type out all of the winners. I'm not going to type out every single comic, but if you want to know what all the comic adaptations are, de facto, we've talked about them in every chapter. You can go back and use this as a reference point to bounce around if you want. Or if you want to go back and actually get the spoiler and say, well, what happened in that story, Tennessee Fats? Click on the links in the description down below. It'll take you back to all 24 Battle Royales. Even the additional parts that we made for some of those as well. Everybody, I am so happy to finally have that done and be able to finish this project for you all. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. I hope you are going to use this to go back and save yourself a little bit of money. Don't buy the ones you don't want to buy. Just buy the good ones. That's our video for this week, everybody. I'm so happy to be able to release this during Sumerian September 2025. What day we're going to put it on? I don't know. Once we finish editing, we'll get her out there for you and we'll go from there. Everybody, I hope you have a great day. We'll see you in the next video. All right, let's wrap this one up and stick our Tennessee Fat Loyal Easter egg in the end of the video. That's what we're doing here. You guys who have stuck around to here know I put these at the end of my videos, and they don't always deal entirely with the topics of the video that we covered today, but they're a good venting point for me to get things off my chest. And today we are going to get two things off of my chest that we need to have a conversation about. The first one being thank you. You, the viewers, and you, the people who have watched these videos and reached out to me and had conversations with me, are really what has driven me more and more to continue down the road that I've gone into. I was asked the other day why I started this and what the intention was and who I was hoping to reach with this. And it's funny because I get asked that question by my immediate family all the time. So you would think I would have a really good answer for this because I'm asked all the time. No, I don't have a good answer, which is why they ask all the time. And it took me moments to step back and say, why am I doing this? Honestly, it's to give me a chance to communicate with people like you, people who have the same interests that I do. And I recognize my interests and the things that pique my interest are not the norm. And I'm not sharing them with everybody around me. So it makes it rather difficult for me to reach people of like mind and have a conversation about these things. But shooting these videos was a chance for me to vent, here's my thoughts on these things. I never expected this channel and these videos to get where we are now. As of the recording of this video and the release of this video, I think I'm around 800 and some odd subscribers. Now, there are a million subscriber channels out there on YouTube, and there are people with huge followings, and that's fantastic for them. I hope they're very happy. 800 to them would mean next to nothing. 800 to me means a hell of a lot. It really does. I started this with 0, as every YouTuber does, and just slowly clunked our way along here. I stopped doing the, hey, subscribe, like, and all that garbage because I thought it was disingenuous to throw it into the videos. I said, if you really are interested in these things, you're just organically going to follow through. I didn't think anybody would, but we did, and that's what got us to where we are today. At no point in time have I said, okay, well, I'm just going to do this, and that's all I'm going to do. I've continued to talk to you guys about things that are on my mind. Other things that I enjoy as well. Recently, with the Kickstarter and heavy metal coming back out on a regular basis, I've been bringing that in because that's also on my mind. Going forward, I have some other Howard stuff that we're going to go down the road on because I think he's a phenomenal author and I think he needs to be really drilled down into some more. So that's where we're going to go next. But for now, just based on where we are, thank you to all of you. I truly appreciate you. I appreciate you. So thank you. That was number 1. Number 2. I was asked in the preparation of this video if I was going to discuss my favorite comic adaptation. And I thank you very much for asking that question because in watching all of my videos going from there to here, and I will say, by the way, some of those early ones were really painful to watch. Ugh. And going from there to here I always ran into this artificial ceiling I gave myself, which was thou shalt not discuss and bring up what your favorite one is, because the whole point of this is objectively to say this one is closer to Robert E. Howard than that one. That's it. That's why we're here. That's the point of the Battle Royales. That's a really impinging thing for people who have a stream of consciousness babble like me. It's like, I can't say it. Okay, now I can. So I went back on all of my original notes. I got out both of these books, which have all of my contemporaneous notes for every single one of these videos, to say, well, which ones blew me the most. So, to answer your question, here we go. I'm going to give you 2 honorable mentions, and then I'm going to give you my absolute favorite. Here's the surprise. None of these are Queen of the Black Coast. I know, it's really weird. You would think with that being my favorite Conan story by Robert E. Howard ever, it would be one of those, but it's not. It's not at all. Okay, let's go back. Okay. First honorable mention goes to the Savage Sword adaptation they did of People of the Black Circle. That was an incredibly good adaptation. It skewiffed the end. It really did skewiff the end. And I'm not cool with that. But what they did was they really dove into and leaned, notice how I'm leaning, like the Sagittal Boys, leaning into that thing of, was Robert E. Howard creating a strong female character to basically run the story with Conan as an equal? When I read that story, I thought, okay, this is my theory. And again, I have all sorts of theories, but I'm just a crazy old man. The fact that Marvel, much earlier than me ever coming up with this, was doing that in their story was almost like, whoa. And again, it's one of those things where you read it and you're like, okay, I didn't expect you to lean into that much, but they really strengthened that character. And I thought that was a phenomenally good job. So that's honorable mention number 1. Honorable mention number 2, I would have to say, goes to Dark Horse's choice to do 12 issues to do the story of Hour of the Dragon. The 2 6-part miniseries, which were a phenomenal pain in the ass to get my hands on. Oh my God. Such a pain in the ass. But I'm glad we got them. Were phenomenal. It was totally worth it. As much frustration as I had getting all 12 of those issues, I'm so glad I have them. Here's why. That was a great story. It's an epic story. And they really dedicated the time to do it. But what they did when they were doing it was they added these beautiful turns to it and beautiful twists. And they, again, were leaning into an idea and a change and a twist in the story that wasn't accurate to Robert E. Howard, but I really enjoyed answering that question of what is the heart of your kingdom? And that was a constant thing Howard was harping back to in the story. Well, what is the heart of your kingdom, Conan? What is it? And Conan's thinking, well, it's me. Yeah, it's me, right? It's me. Totally me, right? And then within the story, could it be the heart of Ahriman? We don't know if that's it. But the last line is, I'll make her a queen. Dark Horse leaned right into that. I said, no, the heart of your kingdom, Conan, is actually Zenobia. And when they did their story, which was retrospective, really old man King Conan, thoroughly miserable and angry, looking back because everybody's died around him. And he's the last man standing, looking over the grave of Zenobia and clearly stating, this was the heart of my kingdom. The family unit created by her was it. That's just, I'm sorry, that's just heart-wrenching. Like, you could just reach in here, pull it out, throw it on the floor, stomp on it a couple times, pick it back up, sew it back in, then rip it back out again. That was just phenomenal, like jaw-dropping writing. And that was great story. So you would think with all the rambling I've done for that, why isn't that your number one, Tennis Fan? No. My number one is actually really obscure and dumb, and you're going to laugh at me about this. It's the Dark Horse version of King Conan and the Scarlet Citadel. And the reason why is because of the visual depiction of the pure horror that he was running into in the dungeons. Giant snake, okay, I hate snakes, like really hate snakes. So for me, personally triggering, yeah, that was enough. That got me. And this is one of the reasons why I really hate Snake Man. It's like, yeah, Snake Man, that's just nightmare fuel. Not a good thing. Giant snake, bad. Running into crazy sorcerer guy that's trapped down there that just raises an eyebrow and giant snake then bolts, bad. Like the way they depicted that guy was just, what the hell? It was incredible. And the fact that reading that and then going and reading the early issues of King Conan that were issued by Marvel, where he has to go back to that very guy and ask for help, adds a whole new level of horror to rereading those stories. So if you want to really just give yourself a little bit of a mind twist and change the frame of the story, read the 6-part King Conan, Hour of the Dragon, and then go pick up your King Conan series from Marvel and read those intro stories and realize how terrified Conan was going back and asking that guy for help. Yeah. But that wasn't really it. What did it for me? The gibbering blob thing out of the well. I'm still horrified, like literally, right? You can't see it, but in my mind, there's under here, there are goosebumps. I can feel them popping up just because that concept is so horrifying to me. I don't even know what the concept is, but I built a picture in my mind based off of what I've seen in that Dark Horse adaptation that's just terrified me now. And I'm sure that is going to be new nightmare fuel for me for pretty much the rest of my life. That's that. And that makes for a good comic. So there you go. That is the two things that I wanted to cover today. The first one being thank you. And I'll even allude to an additional point here being saying, if you stuck through me through all those early videos, which I've just had to rewatch, which were so painful, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And the second one being, well, here's my favorite one. And thank you for asking, because that's something that I've wanted to talk about for a while. That's pretty cool. All right, so we got some other ideas for things that are going to be coming up in our next couple of videos. We still have a lot more Conan to cover. Absolutely. This is not the end of Conan. This is just the end of the Robert E. Howard Conan-specific Battle Royales. No, there you go. I'll run some roll at the end of this one where you guys can see some of the images of the comics that we went through. And, well, a rather interesting photo of me out in the wild just doing crazy Tennessee Fats things. Yeah.